Do you want us, will you share the presentation from your end?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Welcome everyone to another session at Next Normal. We are jumping from one to another, so it's going quite dynamic. We are actually doing a sequel of our November session at Next Normal Week US edition, again with our colleagues from Conversation Health. And the title is of the sequel, once again, how to combine digital and humans to build lifelong relationships with customers. I think that this time this session is even more meaningful because we are almost a year in this whole digital transformation process. And really pleased to welcome here today our very good fellow, and I can call him even friend. Hi, Shwen, how are you?
Hi, Dario. Good to be back. Thank you for having me again. I just wish we could join you in Croatia.
Well, eventually one day we will. Sheila Patel. Hi, Sheila. How are you?
Good, Dario. Thank you.
Great. And Richard Marcil from Conversation Health. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Hey, Dario. I can't believe you called this a sequel. This is going to be so much better than what we talked about last fall.
Exactly. I mean, we all know Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's kick off. I think it's that the slide in particular is quite interesting because we see that necessity is the mother of invention, right? And the bulb, I think, is one of the greatest inventions ever after the invention of Nikola Tesla, who actually invented electricity, if we can say it in that way. But Richard, would you be able to kick off the stage with the intro about this particular necessity for digital transformation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thank you, Dario and team, and we're going to jump in shortly. I mean, we're kind of living in the new reality emerging from COVID-19, and while 2020 was challenging, 2021 is equally challenging. But there is this light at the end of the tunnel, and it's really driven and powered by tremendous transformation and digitization of our businesses. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll focus a little more specifically on humans and digital and how they can and will enhance each other's complementary strengths, right? Certainly leadership, teamwork, creativity, social skills are a human trait, but how do we take advantage of that, or how do we blend that with the speed, scalability, and accessibility of technology? So that's where we're going to go. Let's skip to the next slide and let's get into it a little more. And certainly in the context of with no time to react, it's been really, really interesting to see how some companies really leapfrogged traditional capabilities in 2020, right? Well, we'll talk certainly about the commercial challenges of a stranded field force or sales force and the rise of e-medical affairs and all of that and their impact on the commercial and med affairs teams and even R&D to a certain extent. Sheila and I will cover some, actually Shwen and Sheila will cover some clinical trial stuff. So no facet of the organization is left untouched. We'll focus really on the interplay on digital and humans in the context of digitizing an enterprise at speed and scale. And we'll give you 4 very specific examples, like real world examples of how work is being done by your peers, your colleagues. You'll see that most of it is pretty bold because it had to be. Right? Specifically, I'll call out a little bit on the upper right-hand side. Organizations that love to POC or make minor changes on the edges of their business will struggle here, right? This environment is very harsh and requires really focused, significant, and scaled effort. This is, I think, one of those times where tinkering just will not deliver on the ROI. Dario, let's jump one more. All right, so let's talk about where we are today, right? So as you move into commercial plan of actions for Q2 or business planning for the second half of 2021 or even 2022, I think you want to consider the following in the context of your business, right? Certainly, COVID has not gone away and will remain a significant challenge well through 2021. I mean, we don't need to talk about variants, boosters, and others. It continues to be a bit of a mess. There's light at the end of the tunnel, but our businesses and our interactions won't be the same. Look at your peers and your colleagues and your COVID manufacturers have learned digital faster and at scale in a way that many of us haven't yet. So there's this rise of a new organization that that truly blends digital and humans together. But that new organization may be thinking or delivering digital first and then escalating to humans. A bit of a flip of our traditional model, which was Salesforce-led, MSL-led, and others. And by the way, we also had digital services. So that's a big, big portion of what we're going to talk about. And of course, ultimately, the virtualization of nearly every aspect and function of the business, literally from bench all the way to commercialization to med affairs and safety reporting. So that's how we're going to talk about digital and humans and feed you some examples, some insights around that. Sounds good?
Absolutely fine.
Okay, good. So 4 things we're going to cover, right? Let's talk about digital and humans in terms of competitive advantage. We're going to go through 4 of these examples and really case studies: commercial, patient support, medical education, and virtual trials. And Shwen, how about I kick off a little bit? Dario, click through the next one. Shwen and I will cover this one. We're going to talk a little bit about self-service. Let me kick it off and I'll pass it on to Shwen. I'd say in a year where it's been very difficult to see customers, right, if not impossible in 2020, some companies have really raised the bar in terms of customer engagement, right? Instead of pulling the lever on another outbound or push channel, some manufacturers are actually building what I would call proper self-service and really developing pull muscle for their physicians or their customers, broadly speaking. Surely that lines up with customers' growing wants and needs around engaging digitally, right? And first, and of course, in a digital fast way, right? Our expectations of digital is immediate response. For example, intelligent agents are used to allow customers to engage a company or a brand in a very human-like way, except it's digital. And whether it's for commercial resources, medical information, or even service support, some of your peers are offering that. I'd say one of the things that's really important to remember is that customers, customers, your HCPs particularly, want to engage manufacturers. They really want to do. But they want to do so on their terms, right? At their time of their choice, in the channel of their choice, at their pace. And most often it's 24/7, but oftentimes weeknights and weekends. So we need to be there to help them. And that's where self-service is becoming and finding its legs. It's not as if we don't have that of every other facet of our lives. We do. How do we bring that to our customers in the context of our world? So certainly what I'd encourage the group to do post the presentation, it's look really closely at some of your peers. Some of them have really well-developed self-service portals. Some are really easy to find, right? So URLs like askcompanyx.com or askbrandx.com, super memorable, super accessible. Some have highly developed conversational AI capabilities. It's almost human-like, whether it's in text and voice. And some will even allow their customers to access on-label and off-label content, right? Highly, highly sought by physicians particularly, and stuff that they can't find elsewhere. And the very sophisticated ones still allow for escalations to humans, right? So this is not a digital-only model. It's a beautifully blended digital to human engagement model. So spend time on what your peers are doing. It's out there. So certainly from my perspective, self-service is one of the powerful use cases for blending digital and humans together. Shwen, what do you think from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Richard. And to some of the points you mentioned earlier, I don't think it's changed for decades, actually, what a physician wants or what an HCP wants. It's always been put it all in the same place, make it easy for me to find and let me get access to it whenever I want and how I want, right? So it's not that different. I think the difference is now the ubiquity of devices and access and the ability for HCPs to be able to actually get this information quickly and on demand. They're all there. It's just a matter of whether we flipped our model, and it wasn't driven as much as until we had this lack of access of real field people going in that we really started to amplify the importance of that kind of a service. But certainly it's not just in the HCP world. We're seeing that in the patient world as well, the consumer or the patient world, helping guide them to the right type of services or right type of information. Certainly, you're starting to see the rise of, guided bots, for example, on brand websites to take them to the right type of resources for some of the more complex things like copay, for example, right? How do we get to that piece of information and how do I fill it in? And then if it really gets too complex, how do I connect to the patient support center? And sorry if I'm stealing a little bit of the thunder for later, but I'm saying that's another self-service channel that we're starting to see start to automate and become digital in this era, and has been, enhanced by the lack of ability to actually support in the field. Overall, I think we're starting to start to initially see how we're digitizing what we used to do in real life in face-to-face type of situations. But then also now we're starting to think beyond that of how are we changing the experience in a digital world where it becomes digital first and not necessarily just replacing that human interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good insight. And I'll just double click on the word customer experience. I think it's truly, as we move from customer centricity as a bit of a buzzword, I think we're really bringing customer experience to life in many respects with using some of these technologies and better handoffs between technology and humans. Sheila, the same thing is happening on the patient side of the business, right? On the patient side of pharma. Daria, you want to click us through to the next one? Sheila, I think will take us through some of her work.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a lot of parallels, as you mentioned, into the patient support programs. But we're also seeing that these programs are not fully taking advantage of digital. And so what we saw in this past year is, one, a little bit of pent-up demand. Obviously, folks not going into the doctors has and will result in delayed actions really for patient services. But also, we see that companies are really struggling to scale the patient support programs, really due to the high effort required from the existing technologies that are really out there. And so just because a lot of the companies have multiple interfaces online, they're really still falling short on the optimal customer experience, as we discussed in the prior section. And we see that specifically. I've got an example here from a family member who has these manual repetitive tasks for re-enrollment into a patient support program, and there's really an opportunity for technology to help remove this burden, right? If you think about it from the patient perspective, they're already having this disease progression, etc., and they need their interactions really to be simple and easy, and efficient processes will help them scale better. So what we're seeing here is actually the entrance of a lot of new players and technology scalable partners that are really targeting the customer experience and ultimately moving fast, selecting one of these. We're seeing some partnerships out there as well from some of the commercial players as well to enhance and sort of go for it beyond the POC is really what we think. Shwen, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I already alluded to some of these instances, like the ability to drive and direct and help support finding the right type of resources on a brand website, for example. But certainly also you're starting to see leveraging these digital channels as the always on, fully accessible channels that people can go to first, and then only triaging what's needed to the next level, which may be a human that only is staffing a support channel 9 to 5, and there's a limited number because of the scalability of those kinds of resources. So what you're starting to see is, for very simple questions, most people are very comfortable with just getting a very quick response from a digital channel, versus more complex questions which need to be escalated. You're starting to then see that strategy where that gets shifted then to a human contact. But it does really take the burden away from just everybody trying to be, driven to a call center for all their support, and they have to only be limited to a time frame and the number of support staff there are to actually answer their questions. So I think a lot of that is starting to drive the thinking a little bit differently now about how do we leverage the triage effect of what digital can do.
Absolutely. And Shwen, if I put you on the spot for a sec, sorry about that. Is it fair to say too, to a certain extent, as we embrace digital technology and as our customers do, it may also allow us to broaden the amount or the breadth of products, patient support programs, away from only high cost specialty drugs to far more mainstream drugs ultimately?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and if we think about patient support programs and what that means, in the past, I think it was very much a very specific set of initiatives that were pulled together, including the call center and a few follow-ups, and you could subscribe to a certain type of program. But now with digital platforms, whether it's bot-driven or an app or something else, patient support could actually be extended to something that doesn't have any direct interaction, but is managed through, let's say, an app with the patient at all times, and only triggers some kind of connection when a certain threshold is met. So it really depends on the situation, but patient support now can be a multitude of different digital types of solutions, and you're starting to see that even more so with the rise of digital medicines and digital therapeutics.
Absolutely. And I'd say we certainly have seen an amazing pull and request for broader and broader and broader patient support programming, and more innovative and more mainstream for sure. So thank you for that. Very insightful. Thank you, Dario. Sheila, let's you and I talk about congresses a little bit. Actually, some really neat work being done there. I mean, certainly under the guise of it's been difficult to see customers in their offices, it's been all the more impossible to almost see KOLs and thought leaders at congresses because there were no live congresses, or very few in 2020, full stop. And I think in 2021, we'll still have some limits there. But some companies have really raised the bar in terms of virtualizing congresses, but also Congress learning. I think that the challenge is very simple, right? How do we make Congress sessions and session information available in real time to more HCPs around the world, and of course MSLs and reps? To me, the first build was the first briefing, probably about 6 months ago, was more a little bit around doing that and personalizing the experience and curating it and making content snackable. This clinical content is not exactly the easiest stuff to consume. But of late, we've now seen some really nice builds around how do we also extend the content to the post-content. We extend content, to pre-event, event, and post-event, and potentially even connect post-event some HCPs, local HCPs, and qualified HCPs to authors, even company MSLs in their countries. So a big shift in how we're starting to engage and use congresses. Certainly we built one of the solutions we built has been a Congress agent and a very intelligent assistant. Almost think of it as almost bottling an MSL a little bit, or having an MSL in your pocket. And the beauty of that is, it's available 24/7. It's in text and voice and multiple channels. It does include what I said in terms of pre-Congress, remote Congress, post-Congress experiences. Importantly, though, it gets to be personalized to the HCP based on their needs and interests, but really tied to our CRM system. So again, highly personalized and trackable to a certain extent, and using a combination of push and pull interactions so that, we may share some information as a Congress launches and post-Congress, but we also allow the physician to pull on us in a virtual MSL kind of way. And of course, that does not mean we don't hand off to MSLs. Actually, we do a lot of that. Obviously, it's MedInfo, MedAffairs content, so it's sensitive. But importantly, we deliver or we hand off to the proper MSLs. So it's not just the MSLs that are at the Congress, it's the MSLs that are in market who would work with that physician wherever she is. So far more powerful. And right now, we're also starting to potentially adapt some of this approach to commercial education and engagement programs for field forces. So certainly net, the benefit of this approach has been significantly increased reach for congresses versus traditional congresses at the very least. Much better engagement of MedAffairs staff because it's happening pre and post Congress, but it's also happening in the proper country, not just the global MSLs available for that Congress. And ultimately, what Shwen said earlier, it's about customer experience and satisfaction. They feel like they're better service, they have a better ear, and they frankly just get educated faster and better. So again, to me, virtual congresses are a powerful use case in combining digital and humans. Sheila, what's your build, and you're off on that one?
Yeah, so I think the part that really strikes me on this, and what we've been asked to do quite often, is to think about the thought leadership that the person who's actually presenting at the Congress, sort of what is their map, right? So we're seeing that with the extra capacity of some of the thought leaders out there around the world, what they're doing is trying to get their skills updated and upskilled around how to present, how to convey some of the medical speak into non-speak. And so they're actually taking it as more of a learning and development opportunity. And what these virtual congresses and the tools in the digital space does is allow them to support that journey, right? So we're starting to see education programs actually come out to help some of these physicians, become speakers and become, folks that can teach on these different topic areas. So it's an exciting time.
Absolutely. And I'd say, Shwen, you have an interesting role, which is full enterprise role. Any quick commentary on how maybe not that the lines are blurring, but we're developing a better enterprise relationship with our physician versus commercial med affairs, med ed, and others. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're trying to meet the customer and their needs, not by our functions, but what their needs really are, right? Because a lot of times when we build things and we release them to the customer, so to speak, it's based on the fact that we have built it internally based on our function by itself, and the interconnection is not always there. So it's that whole transfer to the next function if you need that service or that resource from that particular group. And so it's a bit like the old world of when we used to have to call up to, let's say, book an airline ticket or something, and we kept getting transferred. It was just annoying at some point. How many times you went through different, sorry, we don't do that here. Please go to this call this number. Like, how are we able to service them in a more holistic way now through the ability to integrate and connect all the different digital resources, channels, and making sure we still have those guardrails and those firewalls for where it's needed?
Absolutely. And again, so yes to all of that. And what I do love the Congress is that you're also just providing such greater access to more physicians to this really great medical insight, leading medical insight. Shwen, while you're on it, I'm going to guess that the concept and the work behind virtual trials is something that you've been very, very keen on for a few years. Tell us more of what's happening in that space.
Sure. I think, clinical trials more than any other part of the industry has been severely impacted by COVID and the inability to actually bring people face to face, right? Because the model that was built over decades was, how do you find people in real life, get them to go to a center of excellence, so an academic center or a site for a pre-screening visit, and for all their visits subsequently once they're enrolled in a study. And so it was heavily dependent on that face-to-face, field-based type approach. So once COVID hit and people couldn't start to get into a clinic, either to be diagnosed, to be screened, or to continue with their study, it became almost impossible to run it the traditional way. And so virtual trials, while not new, there've been examples of this since 2003 or so almost 20 years now, is now suddenly the need for it has been completely amplified, and it's critical in order for us to continue business the way that we want it to at the same pace. And so some of the big challenges that came about when we couldn't start to bring people together in real life included things like, well, they're not going for regular visits, so they're not getting diagnosed sometimes. So you can't get the patient at the time of diagnosis. For some conditions, that's really important. Other ones are, how do you go in to get them pre-screened when they're already immunocompromised for a certain condition or disease that they have? And then you're asking them to go get pre-screened or continue with a study, but that puts them at further risk because you're bringing them to an environment outside of their home where they're not, they might be exposed to COVID. And so there are a multitude of these kinds of effects, never mind the whole fact that, the whole industry has been driven a lot by the whole driving people to sites geographically. And sometimes that could be even hundreds of miles away, depending on the type of study it is. So decentralized or virtual trials has really started to pick up in terms of its importance and the ability to leverage things like remote patient monitoring, and all the digital tools for e-consent and e-pros and so on, to really replace some of the physical face-to-face things that needed to be done in the clinical trial world. And now you're starting to also see, is it really important to go into a site or a clinic or a physical location every single visit? Or can we actually move some of those to be remote and virtual? So those are some of the things that I think are really driving this area right now, especially because of the situation with the pandemic.
Absolutely. That sounds good. Sheila, quick build on that. And I think we're going to start concluding very shortly.
Yeah, so the convenience of that telemedicine experience that we've experienced is not going away, right? And it's going to bleed into clinical trials. So, 10% of clinical trials are 100% virtual right now. About 55% is underway, if you will, or hybrid, but still 35% have zero, right? The CAGR for this is 12.6% over the next 10 years. So, technology has an opportunity. Something simple as the Fitbit that was shown there, the Apple Watch, can gather data and drive patient behavior in a way that probably nothing can, right? So, I think that it's going to become a competitive advantage, and those companies that have an easy trial recruitment and retainment process are going to be the ones that sort of get the patients in and get their trials done sooner. So I'll wrap that up, Richard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Dario, as we obviously conclude, I think what I'd share with the audience is look, as you get into mid-cycle, mid-year planning and you start looking at your second half 2022, the recovery is deeply digital. I think consumer behavior, customer behavior has meaningfully changed. And think of that flip of digital first, maybe human second. And it's also a better utilization of our resources to deploy our valuable humans to the more challenging aspects of the business. Digital and human work really, really well together. It requires deep coordination, advanced capabilities, but we're seeing massive benefits already of combining those. And again, it's not one or the other, it's and where the magic is. And ultimately, some of those are just deep business impact in the short term will increase. And this is, to me, clinical trials. It's literally virtual congresses. It's self-service, immediate lifts in reach, frequency, impact on the business. But there's also cost control benefits, so we can reallocate investment to other parts of the business as it makes sense. And I think the biggest challenge for us as very large companies, again, the environment's massively changed just in the course of 12 months. How do we move significantly forward as global, local organizations? Not something we've done well as pharma. That's our challenge. How do we not have 200 POCs happening, but transfer and transform our business at a scale that we've not done before? It's uncomfortable, but our customers are requiring of it, full stop. Dario, what do you think? Was that, so give us your insights on the sequel. Sequel, good in line with the first, much better than the first?
Well, I can rephrase it. Is Godfather 1 or 2, which one is it?
Nice. There's still Godfather movies. That's right.
Exactly. It's always about the movie, right? We learn a lot in the movies, but at the end of the day, we live how we live. Right. I
agree. And it's a great movie. I think for whoever is here now being part of the action and part of the movie and part of the set and part of the actors, this is as exciting a time as it ever has been in pharma, I believe. I think this transformation is scary, but all the more exciting, and it's positive transformation. So these are really exciting times for us.
Definitely. Colleagues, on the right screen, you can also see the chat section. So please feel free to reply to the people who asked some very interesting questions. Again, thank you very much for joining. We are moving ahead to the agenda, and again, take care and all the best.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.